was 5 and he was 7. We stood shirtless, face to face in the playhouse in my parents' backyard. A boy from my neighborhood and I were playing a game of show me yours and I'll show you mine. But he wanted to do slightly more than showing. I hesitated. If you don't, I won't be friends with your brother anymore. I froze. The idea of compromising my brother's popularity shook the 5-year-old me to the core. I never wanted to disappoint or hurt anyone, so I did what he asked, which was only a 2-second deed requested out of candid curiosity. But from that point forward, the playhouse scandal evolved into anxiety. I began asking my mother if I should feel guilty for what we did that day, and eventually if I should feel guilty for every negative thought I had. I what-ifed about everything possible and even the impossible. I believed that my invented rituals and routines would stop the worst from happening. I was saving the lives of my loved ones when I turned the lights on and off 8 times in a row, and crossing myself 16 times before bed. At age 11, I started sleeping with a pair of clean underwear beneath my pillow in case I was abducted in the night. And that's when my mother decided to get me my first psychiatrist. Mental illness branches throughout my family tree, and she was concerned that it was in full bloom in my brain. The visit was brief. I laid down on the couch and said, I guess it all started when... I continued to joke about my feelings. He prescribed me Prozac. A few weeks later, we received a letter in the mail stating that my new shrink was dead. But he wasn't a member of Boys to Men, so my preteen world remained intact. Once my obsessive tendencies lessened, I convinced my mother I should ditch the drug, and I suppressed my fretfulness until the end of high school, when I spiraled into a maniacal way of functioning once more. I took control of the situation by starving myself and orally purging if anything went wrong, like actually consuming something. My mom caught me in the act and gave me a choice between a nutritionist and a shrink or rehab. I chose the shrink because I wasn't deathly thin and I didn't want the girls that were more successful with their eating disorders to judge me. On my first visit, we established why I was there, my eating habits, my inability to function, and how my anxiety was sucking my will to live. He began erratically scribbling down notes on a legal pad and proceeded to put a Paxil Band-Aid over my problems, with no warning about what it would do to me. I could have researched it, but I assumed that he wouldn't prescribe me a drug that would ruin the next 2 years of my life. I was dating someone that loathed showering and was even more lifeless than me. But I was too lazy to break up with him, so I continued to spray him with Febreze. Paxil affects your sex drive. No, it murders your sex drive. So when I lost my virginity to that winner while on the drug, I believed that sex was a one-sided cruel joke. It felt like going to the OBGYN for an annual checkup every 2 days. After a few months, I'd grown into a fat, hungry robot with a clinical addiction to pie. Dutch apple was my favorite, but pumpkin was a close second. I was a familiar face at Marie Callender's and frequent in Coco's after dark. And I wasn't cutting pieces. It was me, the pie, and a fork in bed, practically catatonic, watching reruns of The Facts of Life. I'd gone from a Blair to a Natalie. My outfit of choice was sweatpants with elastic around the ankles and a secondhand Cheers sweatshirt. During my med checks, my shrink never commented on my weight. I never complained. I didn't want to second guess his judgment. He knew what was good for me. But this Paxil shit wasn't working. I decided to go cold turkey. And for 3 weeks, I felt like I was dying. Heart palpitations and the zaps, accompanied by blurred vision and a fever, mimicked the symptoms from heroin withdrawals. I returned to my shrink once the Paxil was completely out of my system. The decor had changed since my last visit, and it was truly harrowing. The walls were superimposed with unsettling artwork. One masterpiece had a clown surrounded by floating clown heads making various faces. Another was a clown in prison. The clown theme was accompanied by Native American ornamentation. Dream catchers hung from the walls with Navajo weapons and Kachina dolls. I glanced down at the tissue box attached to a wooden drawing doll fixed into a crying pose. Perfectly fitting, because that's all I felt like doing. Crying. Out of fear. I filled him in on the details. So I decided to go cold turkey, and I got violently ill. Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. I wanted out. But I decided it wasn't worth the exertion to search for a new doctor and obediently took the new drugs he prescribed me. Lamictal is lovely. Lamictal is a weight-neutral medication that has no effect on your energy or sex drive. Ask your doctor if Lamictal's right for you. He'd found the right drug for me, but I still needed to talk. I showed up for my appointment on a Monday and started to drain my emotional abscess when I noticed he was blinking for a very long time. At first, I thought he was reflecting, but when his head started to slowly droop, I realized this is actually happening. My therapist, the man I was paying to listen to my problems, had fallen asleep on the job. I started panicking. It was the blind leading the blind. Should I leave? I didn't want to upset him. This was his office, and he did seem really tired. I was tempted to put my sunglasses on him and take a picture because I've always loved Weekend at Bernie's. And it would be an epic Facebook photo. I wanted to fire a single gunshot to make him feel like he'd truly failed at his job. Waking him up would probably involve touching him or shaking him, and I'd rather light myself on fire. So I did the only logical thing. I started shouting my feelings. I just don't know if it's going to last. We fight all the time. It wasn't working. I mean, all the time. His eyes finally opened, and we both sat there staring at each other like I'd walked in on him masturbating to a photo of me. He checked the time and said, "Well, I have another appointment, so this is the end of our session this evening." I speechlessly nodded, paid, and left. For the next few months, I'd given my professional listener the silent treatment, which I'm sure he appreciated. He did need the rest. I finally ran out of medication and needed to go see my dealer for a refill, so I reluctantly made another appointment. On the way there, I started to reflect on the good things he taught me. He said if your ex starts telling you about how he's torn up inside because he hurt you, the best way to respond is, "That must be really hard for you." I tried it once, and it worked wonders. That was worth at least 2 copays. Months had passed, and I had loads of problems to discuss. 30 minutes in, and his legal pad was filling up. He was really listening this time. He's so good at this. I can't believe I was ever mad at him. This positive train of thought came to a screeching halt. There it was again, the long blinking, really long, and then the reflecting. Alas, his head dropped completely, and his breathing became shallow. Snoring had set in. His slumber had officially commenced. My eyes raced around the room searching for an idea. I flashed back to the time he'd taken a nap during our previous session, and the yelling began. "It's been a crazy few months. I'm pretty sure that we're breaking up, and I think he's cheating on me. I just don't know what I want out of life anymore." So there you have it. There it is. Right there. Yep. He jolted himself awake, but this time he subtly acknowledged it. "Well, sounds like things are going really well with you and your boyfriend. And you've set some really great goals for yourself. I'm sorry I'm so tired. I took a late flight last night. I was on vacation for a few weeks. I decided to respond with the only thing he'd ever taught me. Well then, that must be really hard for you.
Holland Holzer.